Hello, this is Susan Heaton-Wright. I'm absolutely delighted to be sharing one of my webinars, Be Seen, Be Heard, Make an Impact virtually for the amazing We Are the City community. Now then, as you know, this is a recording due to Wi-Fi problems. What I will say is no one died from Wi-Fi failure. There are bigger things going on in this world, and give yourself a hug for going for it. I wanted to say hello. Now, if this was normally a live event, I would be encouraging people to say things in the chat, to try and start some dialogue. This isn't possible for this webinar, so I actively welcome you to contact me via LinkedIn. Either you can link with me, there's only one Susan Heaton-Wright, to ask questions. Also, during this webinar, you have a little worksheet to accompany this, and if you've got any questions, we are planning to do a Q&A session in a few days' time so that all of those questions can be answered. Before we start, I want to share the learning objectives. I want to make sure that you make the most of this situation. This is a fantastic opportunity to raise your game, and if you know how to make an impact in virtual meetings and conference calls, you will really be noticed in a positive way. But there are a few things here. So I believe that if you understand who you're talking to and what's relevant to them, what the purpose of your conversation is, this is really powerful. To consider virtual platforms that you might be speaking on. Now, we're on Zoom, but there are other platforms. I would also positively encourage you to have conversations on other platforms, whether that be on FaceTime, having a WhatsApp conversation, text message, or even good old email, because having that variety can make a real difference. We get very tired when we're constantly on Zoom, so breaking this up can make a real difference. Creating clear, concise, focused messages, the importance of preparations and ideas for preparing, how non-verbal communication, i.e. body language and presence, play a part in any speaking, even online, and how we can make it as easy as possible for others to listen to us, particularly in a virtual setting. A little bit of background, I created my own communications methodology 5 years ago. I identify 5 key areas that I believe are essential to ensure that you really make an impact when you're having conversations with other people. Now, my area of expertise is verbal communication. However, this can also be applied to written communication. And they are audience, content, preparation, performance, and voice. And we're going to touch on all of those 5 areas today. Obviously, if you want more information about going into things in more depth, I'd be delighted to have a conversation with you or any of your team members. Audience. About 3 years ago, I attended a conference, and the nature of the conference was that all of the speakers spoke for about 10 to 15 minutes. So there was a lot of movement, a lot of energy with that, which was fantastic. There was a speaker I was really looking forward to hearing. She was from the United States, and she came to speak on a specific topic around talent development. And from the word go, she talked about baseball, about the players, about the different rules, about how you score and things like that. The audience, which was mainly female and British, we were completely bewildered by this because we knew nothing about baseball. And what would have been an absolutely fantastic speech was just didn't go down well because the audience weren't engaged with what she was saying through no fault of her own, but she had not made it relevant to her audience. I'm sure there are situations that you've been in where you have been listening to somebody else speaking, either in a conference like I was, or a virtual meeting, or a conference call, where that person speaking and their purpose just is not landing with the audience, whether they are using the wrong examples or they're going into too much detail. So knowing your audience is absolutely crucial. And I will go into that in a moment. We have a very small amount of time to be able to build up trust with other people. When we're in the real world, we can do things, we've got visual cues going on there, and we can just have a little chat around it before we go into a meeting. But in the virtual world, everything is shorter and we've got to keep things concise. So we've only got a small amount of time to build up that trust. So how can we do that? Well, there are a couple of things that I recommend, and one of them is to really think about the purpose, why you're speaking, what the purpose of your content is. Is the purpose relevant to the person you are speaking to? If it's not, is it worthwhile having a meeting? Because that person might be disengaged from the word go. But also there are other things that you can consider, and that is who you're speaking to. If you've got 4 or 5 people that are in a virtual meeting, perhaps you work with them and you know about their strengths, their weaknesses. It might be that it's worthwhile thinking, is this person tech savvy? Are they up to speed with this? Do they need a little bit more support? Or is there everybody in the room that will understand the terminology that I'm talking about? Is there anybody in this room who doesn't speak English as their native tongue, and you might need to make sure that you do not use really, really complicated analogies to ensure that they feel completely included in the conversation. Likewise, it could be if there are different departments, if there are people from different departments and disciplines in the meeting, you might need to hone your message to make sure that they are still included in the conversation. When I'm going to have a conversation, I always do a little checklist. I think about things that I need to ask or find out. So I might ask about the discipline of the people that are going to be in the room, their seniority, where they've worked before, what their particular interests are within this meeting, what's going to be relevant to them. And it will be really powerful, because when we come to think about the content, you will be able to hone the content so that it is very focused very quickly. Another thing is that listening is an absolute gift for anybody. I know that when I speak to other people, when I have conversations with them, it's not just me speaking, and I feel really, really valued when I know that the other person is listening to me. In a virtual world, this is more complicated, isn't it? Because we might not necessarily be able to demonstrate that we are listening. But if we think about listening in real life, it could be that we are looking at them, we've got eye contact, we change our body language so that it's mirroring the other person. Perhaps we're nodding or showing other gestures to show that we are listening. It might be that we're, yes, might be asking questions. So in a virtual world, it's really, really important when you can to be able to do the following. It might be that you could use chat. You could ask questions that way to show that you're engaged. Certainly with webinars that I do, I encourage people to use the thumbs up or the applause as well as chat. So that, and I actually actively encourage this going on all the way through. So I know they're listening, I know they're engaged, but they feel that they can show me that they are actively responding to the conversation. But what about if you are that person that's in a webinar, in a virtual meeting? First of all, I would say to make sure, if possible, to switch on your video. There is something about the human connection. We've got to keep the human connection in the virtual world, because otherwise we might as well be speaking to machines. Switching on the video means to say that you can really see the other person's face, and you can be demonstrated by showing that you're listening. But yeah, actively get involved in chat and be aware of your facial expressions, because that can really, really help the person who is speaking. So the next thing is content. You are all experts at what you do. You have expertise and you should know what you're going to say. I will be disputing that a little bit later. In the virtual world, as you know, we get very tired from these constant meetings, and our minds can wander. We're getting so many messages coming to us. Perhaps our mobile phone is tweeting, or we're getting emails. We've got family around us. My son is playing his piano at the moment, which I think you might be able to see, but you might have young children, or you might have other members of your household who are also working. These are all distractions. So as a speaker or somebody contributing to a meeting, we need to make it as easy as possible for the other people to take in what we say. So I've got a couple of tips around this. First of all, there is somebody that I highly admire, and he's called Joe McCormack. He has been on my podcast a couple of times, and in the app, I've put both of his interviews. Absolutely fantastic stuff. He basically said what I've just said, that we as human beings are being bombarded by more and more content being thrown at us. And our brains can't cope with all of that, and we filter out what we think is relevant and what we don't think is relevant, and we might miss something important. So what we need to do is to try and make it as concise as possible or brief as possible. Then we will make more impact. And that almost feels like a contradiction in itself. But if you're able to keep things brief, focused, concise, you will make more impact with what you say. He says, and I agree with him, that in these meetings, keep things at top level. So rather than going into a lot of detail, statements, overall statements, then if people need to ask you questions, they will do. Or it might be that you agree that you come out of the meeting at the end of the meeting and have a specific conversation around that topic. He also says it takes preparation to be more brief, because you're cutting out all of the excess information and keeping it focused. And finally, what he would say is, if you don't know what you're talking about, don't say anything. All right? But there's more information about that in the app, and you will find those two interviews fascinating. Another thing is to make sure that the start of anything that you say is very clear. Now, on a number of occasions, I have trained people using webinars and virtual meetings, and I've positively encouraged them to say their name first. So this is Susan Heaton-Wright from Superstar Communicator, then go into what you say. Because particularly if it's a big meeting, a big conference call, people's names and who is speaking can get lost within that. So that's my first tip. The next thing is, make sure that you're making it very, very clear what you're going to say from the word go. So, for example, I believe there are three really good ways that you could do this. You could say a statement first of all, a question, or a specific statistic. And all three of those set the scene of what you're going to say. You're saying to the rest of the people on the conference call or in the virtual meeting, this is Susan Heaton-Wright. This is what I'm going to say. And then you go into the main part of what you're saying. Very, very clear, very concise. Also, end it really well. It might be that you are making a contribution to a conversation, but end it in a positive way and a strong way, because then people will remember that last thing you said. Now, it might be that you say, I recommend this particular project ends this Friday, or I recommend, or I need all of your information by Thursday evening in order that we can run this particular meeting on Friday. So it's very, very clear. All right, does that give you some ideas? Right at the beginning, I talked about a speaker who came from the United States who spoke at an event. Can you remember which sport she was using as the analogy? Which sport? If I were to do this live, I would be getting loads of comments in the chat. I'm not going to say what it is because I want you to really think about it. But one thing that happens when you tell a story is that people remember things. Now, I didn't tell you to remember this story right at the beginning of the presentation, but there will be a number of you who will have remembered which sport it was that she was talking about. And this is the power of storytelling. We are wired up to be able to feel emotion and to remember how we felt. And stories are very powerful from that. Even when my son was a few weeks old, I always used to tell him stories, read him stories. And it's perfectly normal for children to have stories, and we understand that. We know how we feel. We feel happy. We feel frightened about the dragon in the wood. We feel really happy at the end because the prince and princess come together, or somebody wins the race. And it's exactly the same when we are using stories within speaking. And this is even more important in a virtual world where we only have a limited amount of time to keep people's attention, and we want them to remember things. So if you use a story or a case study to illustrate something, it is very, very powerful, because the audience will remember how they felt with that. And you can embed key things to illustrate what you need to say, and they will remember that. Again, I have put a very, very interesting podcast interview specifically about that. I've got a very, very simple storyboard that you can use either to tell a story like I did at the beginning about that speaker, or a case study. Now, when you say story, some people are probably thinking, but that's like a novel or fiction book. No, we're not wanting a really, really long story. It's just a very straightforward one to make a point, or to illustrate a point, or to share a case study. This is one that I regularly use. Once upon a time, this happened. Suddenly, and then you have happily ever after, or the conclusion. I would like to hope if you were sharing a story or you were sharing a case study, there would be a positive thing at the end of it. But see how you can use that structure. You only need as short as one sentence for each of those sectors. All right, so we're coming on to preparation. And you know as well as I do that if you are well prepared, you are more likely to do well. I know there are some people that wing it. Good luck to them. But on the whole, the more preparation you do, the better you are going to do, and you're going to feel more confident. But there is preparation and preparation. I could do an entire webinar on preparation, but I sadly don't have the time. But I will share with you a couple of tips related to this. So first of all, what are you going to say? You are all experts at your area of work. There's no doubt about it. And inside, you know what you're going to say. But it makes it even more sense to kind of work out what you're going to say. Perhaps a structure like I was saying before in content, having a good beginning, a good call to action at the end, perhaps put in a couple of very, very simple stories to illustrate what you're going to say or the point. Maybe you need to have your figures at hand so that you can share them with the other people in the virtual meeting early on. All of those things are preparation, but it is worthwhile doing that. Looking at the agenda beforehand, is there anything that you want to say? Is it necessary for you to be there? Because it's worthwhile commenting about that if you don't need to be on the meeting. Also, preparing yourself. Now, before this webinar, I checked in very early with the lovely We Are the City team to check on the tech to make sure everything was working. I also have all of my notes here, and I had done some preparation by running through it a few times, so I was really familiar with my content. I had my water, I had my light set up, my microphone, made sure that there was a note outside my door saying, please don't come in for the next 45 minutes. What sort of things could you do to prepare? Now, I know a number of you have children as well, so it might be that you're preparing that they have their lunch while you're doing a meeting, or that they are happily settled in front of their computers doing their schoolwork. There are lots of things that you can do to do that. I would also say having your tea, having your water, having your notes ready, having a notebook, arriving early, because I'm doing a lot of webinars at the moment for various organizations, and I'm surprised there are some people that arrive late, or they log in very late and they've already missed the first few minutes. So it's, you know, it really makes a difference to be there on time at the beginning. Then you're not flustered, you're ready to go. One tip that I have learned from my very dear friend Penny Pullen, who wrote Virtual Leadership, she said that keeping things human is very important, having that human connection. And her big tip is to have photographs of all of your team, or if possible, if you're having a meeting with a number of people that are off-site or other organizations, that you have their photos and you distribute this beforehand so everybody can print it off and have it next to their laptop. Then we can really be thinking about who else is on the call, and when they're speaking, being able to see their face, particularly if it's a very big webinar or big conference call and faces get lost. It's a really powerful thing to do. Another thing is physically to warm up. I don't know about you, but I'm in a situation where I'm sitting here all the time at the moment and not getting up, walking around as much. I'm freelance anyway, I'm self-employed, so it's possibly slightly different for me than for other people on this call. It might be that if you have a meeting, then you walk round, you might go and have a chat with one of your colleagues. At lunchtime, you might go out and get a sandwich, you walk to work. But in this virtual world where we're working from home, my commute is coming up the stairs and I'm aware that I can get stiff. So every hour I make sure that I do some exercises. I've got something on my my tracker that beeps me to make sure that I'm exercising. But it might be just before a meeting. You want to get a bit more energized. There are various things that I do. I stretch and I just get my shoulders and my neck really relaxed. I've also put a whole warm-up routine that I use still in the app, and you can access that if you wish. So next we have performance. All the world's a stage and everyone's a player. Whenever we show up, whether it's virtually or in real life, other people are watching us and they are making assumptions about us based on our appearance, our body language, our demeanor, all of these things. And this can really positively or negatively impact the impact that you have when you're speaking to others. Now, this particular communication model was created by Albert Mehrabian. It has been much misquoted. Some really astonishing things said on stage and in podcast webinars, all of those sorts of things. It was when I went to a network meeting, and with due respect to image consultants, this image consultant said that your personal communication was 93% what you wear. It was then that I realized that I needed to go back to his original papers and his research, because he certainly didn't say that. And he certainly didn't say that these three things, spoken words, the vocal tone, and your body language, are three separate things. What he said was that in order to make the most impact, these must be matching. So if you're saying something very strong and you've got a very weak voice and it sounds a bit timid, and your body language is very closed, you are going to confuse your audience. They are not going to listen to what you're saying anymore. They're going to think, well, why is this person's voice very weak? Why is their body language not confident? And I'm sure that we've all seen people in these situations. Another one is somebody who's lying. They're saying something very confident. They're very confident, and the statement is, but they're looking shifty and they're perhaps not, there's no eye contact. And it's confusing. So we don't know what to believe. So my message here is to really think about making sure that whatever you say, you match it with a confident vocal tone that is appropriate, and that your body language matches it. So if you are in a leadership role and you're leading, I'm not saying to be aggressive, but if you have a statement to say to your team, you need to say it in a confident way, as well as the words being confident, and to have open body language. Really think about that and start watching other people with what they do. Particularly on television, dramas are very good for that, because you can see whether that's all matching or not, and a good actor or actress will be able to play on that. Another thing that I find very, very useful is the work of Amy Cuddy. I'm just going to take a glass of water. Amy Cuddy is a social psychologist, and I personally, like everybody else, have seen her TED talk. I've seen her speak. I've gone back to her research, and I've read her book. So I've done my research on this one. Amy Cuddy said, quite rightly, that your body language shapes who you are. So if you are seeing somebody else and you see their body language, whether it's online, whether it's on the television, whether it's in real life, we will make some assumptions of them based on this, on the information they're giving to us, non-verbal communication. However, what she identified, and I will flag up that there is some scientific disputing about this as to whether it's true or not. She identified that you can change the way that you feel inside by your body language. So I don't know if your grandma used to say to you, chin up on those occasions. By having this open body language and confident body language, you can feel more confident. Likewise, if you feel stressed and you're down like this, it can make you feel less confident. She did an analysis of people's saliva, and when people adopted a powerful posture, they secreted endorphins, which are feel-good chemicals in our body. Likewise, those people that adopted a closed body language, they secreted cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and of course you don't feel as confident. So she identified these different extreme postures. I have to say, one or two of these are pretty extreme, and most ladies probably wouldn't be able to adopt the top level one, but we can all identify with these. I'm sure you have seen colleagues, friends, clients adopt some of these postures, and the top ones, you will see that they're all taking up a lot more space. And Amy Cuddy would say that you are secreting endorphins to feel much better about yourself. And the lower ones are all very closed. And she believes that you secrete cortisol, which will make you feel more anxious and less confident. So how can we put this into practice? Why am I sharing this? Well, one thing that you can do before you start is to adopt a positive body language for a couple of minutes before you start. Now, this is something that I've seen time and time again on stage when people share this. You do this, you do not go on stage with this body posture. You do it beforehand for a couple of minutes before you go on stage, and then you feel good about yourself. All right. Another posture here is the Superwoman one, and you have your feet quite far apart, and you adopt this for a couple of minutes. Just breathe in and out and clear your mind, so you're really thinking about what you're going to talk about. And then you go into the meeting room or the virtual meeting room, and you will feel much, much more confident. Even if this is a placebo that scientifically it's not been proven, as some people say, if it makes you feel better and it does you no harm, go for it. Now, why in a virtual world would body language make such an impact? Now, if you are feeling better about yourself, you are more likely to contribute to a meeting in a more positive, confident way. But if you're like this, not only is the vocal tone not as good, but you're not looking as engaged in a meeting. I think you would agree with that, and you're perhaps not going to feel as confident and perhaps a bit stressed about those situations. So really think about your posture when you're in the meeting, whether or not you've got your video switched on. I put this slide here because it's really interesting. This person appearing on a virtual or a face-to-face meeting, we would consider lots of different things about this person. We might think, oh, this person's totally disengaged from the meeting. It might be that we think that they're bored, or might be that the topic is just not relevant to them, or they might not have the knowledge to be able to contribute to that particular part of the meeting. I do ask in the worksheet, what would you do to try and re-engage that person? And I'm sure that if we had chat, there would be lots of chat going on about this too. Now, last year, I don't know if you remember, but the head of the army gave a real dressing down to the army because of some behaviour that was going on when they were off duty. Let's see what posture he adopted. He adopted the Superman or Superwoman. I don't think that that was subconscious. I'm sure he did that deliberately, but he really showed that he was the boss there. Any comments about that? So really think about how you could use your body language, even though it is a virtual world, to make sure you're making a positive impact and you're coming across in a more confident way. The fifth area is the voice. Aren't we lucky? Aren't we lucky? Everybody has their own unique voice, their tone, different accents. It's just wonderful. I love listening to different people's voices, and I'm sure I'm not the only person on this call either. In a virtual world, when the Wi-Fi sometimes becomes weak, like we had earlier today, or the technology is not very good, perhaps some people don't have very good microphones, it is really so important for us to be aware of that and do certain things so that it's as easy as possible for other people to listen to us. So immediately I can think of speaking slower, really projecting your voice if you can towards your microphone so that it's audible to other people. And if you've got a very strong accent, you might want to really focus on ensuring that your diction is very clear so that it's clear for other people in the room. As I say, we want to have a voice that is as easy as possible for other people to listen to us. All right, because they will actually switch off if we're not careful, because that's what happens. Another thing that I want to flag up is the whole issue about pitch of voice. Now, I'm not going to tell you to start speaking very low as though you're like a man. That's not what I'm saying. But I want you to be aware of what happens sometimes subconsciously. You will see this picture of a wonderful lady called Betty Boothroyd, Baroness Betty Boothroyd, and she was the first female Speaker of the House in the House of Commons. She was that lady that would go order, order, and get everybody back sat down and the debate could carry on again. She was adored by all of the MPs in the House of Commons. I was fascinated by her voice, so I wrote to her in the House when she became a Baroness, to the House of Lords, and she very kindly invited me for afternoon tea, and we discussed her voice. And she naturally has a slightly lower pitched voice than mine, but she was aware, quite rightly, that when you are projecting your voice, making it louder, the pitch can go higher. The pitch can also go higher when you're angry, when you're screaming, when you're like that, or when you're anxious. Start listening to other people, it's very interesting. But she actively slightly lowered her voice and then really thought about projecting the voice without pushing. So it's a little bit more difficult to say in this webinar, and I put a little video in the app to describe this more. Basically, you just relax this area, your larynx, your throat, and I'm not pushing the voice down like this, but I'm making sure that I'm not going like this because I'm getting anxious, but I'm just relaxing and allowing the voice to come out. And when it's relaxed, it is going to cut through the noise far more. All right. So if we are getting cross because we can't be heard, in a meeting, because everybody's talking over each other, just relax and then contribute. All right, look at the video as well, because I go into more detail there. But another thing about pitch of voice, there's been a lot done about pitch of voice and how subconsciously we can alter it in different situations. I've also already mentioned that if we're anxious, if we're afraid, if we're excited, the pitch of the voice can go higher. But also there was some research done by Stirling University 2 years ago regarding pitch of voice and social status. They did recorded interviews of 2 people that had randomly met. So they were subjects from the research. And what they found was that if somebody felt that they were more senior than the other person, the pitch of their voice lowered, and they weren't even aware of it. If they perceived that they were more junior than the other person, the pitch of their voice went slightly higher. Now, this was subconscious. They did not realize they were doing this. Absolutely incredible. So what can we learn from this? We need to know, be aware that we might be changing the pitch of our voice slightly dependent on who we are talking to. And people with a slightly lower pitched voice are perceived as more senior. Now, before you, but men and women are different. Absolutely. But women's voices are higher than men's. However, you listen to lots of female leaders, they tend to have voices that they're not pushed down to be very low, but they are low. They're not speaking high like this. They are speaking in a relaxed way and with control and confidence. I want you to go away and think about that. And I'm sure there'll be some questions about this, but start listening to other people. Start watching TV dramas and what the actors are doing there. It might be that they are demonstrating the seniority of a person in a drama, or and they're using their natural voice, but they're using it in a slightly different way. And once we are conscious that we are perhaps adjusting our voice for different situations, it becomes powerful knowledge for us, because we don't want to show somebody else that they're more senior to us or that we're frightened of them if we're in different meeting situations. So really think about that. I'm sure there are going to be some questions there about that. So really, really think about some questions. We're going to organise a session. Alternatively, if you want to contact me, connect with me on LinkedIn, Susan Heaton-Wright, and ask me a question. I would be delighted to answer it. Now, I mentioned earlier on about my app. My app is on Google Play and Apple Store, and it's free. You know, I've made it absolutely free. You don't need to give me your email details. If you want to be kept in touch, that's fine. I'd be happy to do that. But otherwise, just download it. And you need to go to a section called Slides, Learning, Notes. And there's a specific section, We Are the City, Be Seen, Be Heard. And I've put a lot of additional resources there that will be of value to you if you're interested in this more. Also, very, very happy to connect with you on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram. I've got my own podcast called Superstar Communicator, and my website is superstarcommunicator.com. Thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to getting your questions. Bye-bye.